our leaders across all our sites. Today, what I want to talk about is handling sin in a righteous, conscious church. We have a theological expression of grace. We believe that we're made righteous by what Christ's done on the church, and 2 Corinthians 5 speaks about that. It talks about the fact that we are new creations. Ephesians says this again and again, that our identity is pure and perfect, and yet in that mix, we consistently see sin habits. We see people struggling, marriages getting into real problems. We find sin affecting community, and often we don't know what to do about it as elders and leaders in the church, and especially when it gets big and complex. Now today, I want to try and help us to navigate through these things, because what I've seen historically is that you get legalistic churches who basically go, this is your sin, try harder. And then you get grace-based churches who go, you're righteous in Christ. If you can just focus on that, your life will change. Unfortunately, neither seem to produce change. The legalism results in people trying harder, and eventually botching it, exploding, sometimes leaving the faith. The you're righteous, focus on Christ. Some people get that, mostly they don't, especially where wounds are involved. And the result is that they end up losing faith in the gospel because they don't have the tools, they don't have the infrastructure, they don't have the people helping them grow out of their sin. So today, what I'm hoping happens is that we find some language to help people to grow out and heal out of places of sin habits and pain and woundedness. And through this, I think we as a leadership of the church will be able to serve our congregations into healing. And for this to happen, I've asked Madz to come and help me, and I'm going to be asking her some questions, and she's going to be approaching this from a counseling perspective, which is something that in the next season we will be growing in. In fact, it's going to be mandatory for all elders to do the wholeness course, which is eight weeks of videos. We're going to be putting quite a bit of emphasis into being able to grow. But welcome, Madz. It is great to be with you. Madz, in my counseling, I see people who are wounded and really can't change that much to the degree we want them to. And I see other people who are, for whatever reason, just selfish and don't want to change, victims or whatever else you want to call them, who just need to grow. So some need to heal, some need to grow. How do we diagnose between who needs real healing and who needs just pure growth?
I think behind both, Ross, are wounded people. We're all wounded, and how that plays out varies to different degrees. Most people can't see their wounds, or they can't see their kind of dysfunctionality, because so often it starts in childhood. And so it starts as a way of coping with whatever they're experiencing in their home environment, in their peer environment. And so because it's rooted in childhood, often the belief systems and the distorted thinking that operates out of that place moves into the unconscious. And also, a person doesn't really see that kind of thinking as wrong because it works in childhood, because it's a matter of survival. So now you take this, what's working self-protective strategy to life, that's in the unconscious, and now you're moving it into adulthood, into relationships.
Give us an example of that.
So if you grow up in an abusive situation where maybe a father's disapproval of you, you're never good enough, kind of just verbally abuses you all the time, how a child copes with that is they kind of tell themselves it must be true, because a child's never going to challenge an adult in saying what you're saying is wrong. So in order for them to cope and still be able to believe that they're worthy of their parents' love, they will go, well, I'm the problem, I'm not good enough, and how can I change? So either it'll be a matter of become a people pleaser and I deny myself, or I just become a complete dropout and be who they say I am in terms of I'm nothing, and remove myself from their presence, stop trying to get the love that I'm desiring. So I kill off that part of myself. And that's a way of emotionally coping, because then obviously I can resolve it in my mind going, well, I'm the problem, so either I must stop or I must try harder. Then when I bring that into adulthood now, I'm either somebody that just is emotionally dead, or I'm somebody that's continuously trying to seek approval all the time. And to me, that's the norm. if that's how I'm thinking. Coupled with that is the whole, in a sense, a spiritual attack into that place, because Satan's going to use every opportunity to steal and destroy. And so he will feed lies into that scenario. And the whole problem with deception is that you don't know you're living in a state of deception by the very nature of what it means to be deceived. So that's the first thing to understand, is that whether somebody's kind of stuck in selfishness and they're not wanting to change, or they're kind of just wounded and don't know how to change, the root is often because of an underlying dysfunctional belief system about how they operate in life. So secondly, selfish people generally like to use their wounds as a means of manipulation or getting attention.
Yeah.
It works for them. So they can justify their behavior, and they also get to a state of believing that they can't receive love normally. So if I didn't have this victim mindset, if I didn't have this kind of stuff that I carry with me, I'm not going to get the love and attention that I get because of it. So it works for me from that perspective also. And then again, I don't have to take any responsibility for it. Why must I change if it's working?
Yeah.
And generally become highly manipulative people because they want to be in control of their environment, control of themselves, control of what they do. And so there's an element of low self-discipline, low sense of responsibility, and a high level of entitlement. I've been wounded, so now the world owes me. So why must I change? It's not my fault. That kind of distorted thinking. And in a sense, again, why change if everything's working? So that's, in a sense, often where a lot of selfish people kind of go wrong in their distorted thinking. And then when you look at somebody who's wounded and they're stuck in that place of woundedness, it's often because they just don't know how to change. They don't understand the roots of where the dysfunctional thinking works. If you broke your leg as a child and it was never set straight, so that bone re-knit skew, and you learn to run with a limp, to you that's normal.
Yeah.
Until you realize that other people are running faster than you. So sometimes it's a matter of bringing truth into those scenarios, and kind of just almost dissecting what's really going on. And that's a matter of kind of just digging into a person's family background. Another easy way to really quickly discern whether this is just a wounded person that's stuck versus a selfish person is when you are coaching, mentoring, counseling them. A wounded person will kind of leave you feeling energized because they're amped to take ownership of their stuff. Yeah, whereas a selfish person will leave you feeling drained. They'll kind of go, this is my problem, you fix it. And because they've got poor boundaries, and so you kind of have this sense of like nothing, like hopelessness, no amount of helping is changing anything. It'll start to pull out of you high levels of almost irritation. If you've been investing in them for a long period of time and still not seeing fruit, you're going to start feeling almost a resentfulness to those kind of mentoring processes. Because they're not owning their stuff, they're going, the problem is everybody else, and everyone else must serve and fix and change them in order to accommodate my world, because remember, I'm the wounded one and it's not my fault. Yeah. So that's whole victim mindset, where again, a wounded person just takes high sense of ownership. There's a willingness to work at it, even if they don't know how. They also have an ability to show a high sense of kind of remorse or regret. When they realize how their woundedness have impacted others. So there's a much higher level of ownership, and I think that's an easier way to kind of discern between the two.
So invariably, we want to punch the victim, and how are we supposed to deal with the victim in a helpful way that really serves them?
Well, as I said before, one of the biggest stumbling blocks for a victim is that they don't often want to change because it's working for them. Okay, and so one of the biggest challenges that you need to do is almost change the environment around the victim. So the more boundaries that are placed around the victim, the more they're going to feel the dysfunctionality of their own behavior themselves. So the general rule of thumb is that in order to get someone to change their behavior, change their sin, whatever it is, they need to feel the pain of that behavior themselves. Where a victim normally is quite manipulative to the point where everybody else feels the pain of their behavior and not them. And so they generally draw in people who are people pleasers, people who are rescuers, people who are what's the word, my brain's going, codependent type kind of personalities, who will then fit into the role to serve the victim. Yeah. So it's often getting the people around them to kind of go, no, I'm not taking responsibility for your stuff, and they start putting down boundaries. The first thing that's going to happen when you put down a boundary around a victim is they're going to throw an emotional tantrum, because it's all through manipulation, because I want to get my way, and if I can't get my way, then I'm going to punish you through my behavior, my tantrum, my emotions, my words, my fists, whatever it is, to make sure you take that boundary down, because I want to get what I want. Yeah. But if there's consistency in terms of that, the only time a victim's ever going to change, like I say, is when they get to a place of going, this is not working for me anymore. So if I'm counseling somebody who's generally like that, I generally start off kind of saying, to define what is the presenting problem, what's wrong in this situation, and where does being in a better place look like for you? So to kind of paint, if you're going to move through a journey of wholeness or healing or counseling, where do you want to get to? And victims might struggle to say that out loud, because there's an element of already starting to have to own where I need to be, and the last thing I want to do is get there. So if you find someone really struggling to kind of take ownership of what being in a better place looks like, then that's also a red flag. There's a victim there. If they do, they might be a people-pleasing in terms of manipulation, going, well, that's being in a better place because I want to work with you, as a false sense of pulling you in. But then you'll start to see the red flag in the sense of they'll not actually follow through with potential homework, applications of kind of, if you're saying, right, here's what I want you to do. I want you to journal through stuff. I want you to read these scriptures, and they're not doing the homework. They're not kind of taking accountability for what you're challenging them with. That again is the next red flag. I generally won't go any further with a person if they're stopping there. I'll say to them, look, obviously you're not wanting to change.
So good.
And then if that's the case, I'm not going to rescue you. I'm not going to run ahead of you. I will only go as far as you go. So if you're going to only take 2 steps, then I'm not going to go any further. Because 90% of the time is that we want someone to change more than often they want to. So we'll invest, because that's our desire for them, get frustrated and irritated. And with a victim, 2 things are going to happen when you stop rescuing them. They're either going to go find someone else to rescue them, so they'll either go to another church or another counselor or find someone else that mentors them that's going to play that role, or they're going to suddenly find themselves lonely and realizing, you know what, I've either got to adjust and take ownership, or I'm going to end up being lonely. I'm doing this by myself. So depending on where they are in the victim cycle, if they've been hopping and suddenly start getting to a place of going, you know what, I'm so tired of hopping. You might hit a breakthrough in the sense of going, surrender, okay, I need to really own this. Versus going, well, stuff you, I ain't changing, I'm just going to find someone else who will be an enabler to me.
How much mirroring do you do of, okay, you've gone to him, it doesn't seem to be working for you?
Yeah, all those kind of tools are really helpful. That's if they give it to you.
Yeah.
Sometimes they'll kind of go, oh, well, this one failed because of this reason, this one failed because of this reason. So that's where I just think sometimes it's great, even if kind of mentors and coaches are communicating around this, because then there's nowhere to hide, there's nowhere to dodge. And you'll generally find when you're mirroring back, a victim is going to justify if they don't want to own it, and there's going to be an excuse for everything. So again, it's a mirroring back, and they'll either, like I say, either get to a place of going, okay, I accept, or they'll just, because you see what you're basically trying to do is break down a defense mechanism inside of them that's working for them. And that's going to leave them vulnerable and exposed, so that the deeper the wound inside, the bigger and the stronger the defense mechanism on the outside is. And so if you're getting high levels of resistance, because there's probably big pain underneath there, and they don't want to be vulnerable or kind of hurt, exposed. So, it's the kind of truth and love thing where you're loving them so fiercely and you're clapping them so hard they don't know what's coming first kind of vibe. That sometimes works, and again, it's going. Sometimes I'll say to someone in that place, going, I would be doing you a disfavor I wouldn't be loving you if I allowed you to stay in this place. That kind of a language sometimes can work in the sense of going, I love you enough to not allow you to keep running with a limp. Yeah. But if you choose to not receive that, there's nothing I can do. Yeah. So you speak that kind of language over them.
How do you get clear? Because I've watched elders and staff over the years. In the beginning, they go way beyond the call of duty, and then over time they get hurt enough times or whatever enough times, and they go the other way. How do you get clear around my responsibility, their responsibility?
I think how you start off the mentoring process or counselling process or coaching process. So if I'm counselling someone, the very first session is clarifying what's the presenting problem, what's not working in their life that they're wanting help with, getting a very clear picture around there. And before we even go into that, where do you want to go? What does it look like to be in a better place? And for them to paint their goals. Once you've established that, then you've got a measurable. In the sense of, some people might take 4 months to move 10 paces. Some people might take a 1-hour session to move 10 paces. But if there's movement, then at least you're moving somewhere. Yeah. If you keep just hitting blocks. So I would generally, once I've defined that, I will give someone at least 2 or 3 sessions, coaching sessions, and I will intentionally give them some form of kind of homework where I'm going to see how engaged are they in the process. Have I seen any change between my conversation today and my conversation with them next week in terms of what they come back with? If they come back and they sit there and they just look at you in the sense of, well, give me something, then I'm automatically going to start seeing red flags in the sense of, well, what have you done? What homework have you done? What processing have you done? Have you done any journaling? What new discoveries have you come about yourself? If there's no answers to any of those things, then this person is not looking to change, kind of thing. So if you do that early on, you're never going to find yourself in those places of resentment. Yeah. Because you'll put down boundaries earlier. And if you've got people in leadership that don't do that, then there's a big chance that they like to be needed and have that kind of potential codependency inside of them.
So good. Okay, now let's move this to marriage, because we've done this series on love, sex, and how to help that. In marriage, this gets very complex. What tools do you use to diagnose marriage problems?
Okay. When I sit down with a couple, I'll generally try and get each to paint from their perspective what they see the problem to be. Okay, and generally what happens is there's the issue that's on the table that we're conflicting over, but underneath that issue, that context, is a whole different process that's happening in the sense of how I interpret what's going on above the surface, how I'm feeling based on what's going on, my belief systems on self, others, all those kind of things are going on, and those things are rooted in childhood generally. So is to try and get a clear picture of what's the triggers in terms of, whether it's money, whether it's sex, whether it's who does what in the home, those kind of triggers. How are the two communicating around those things? How are they interpreting around those things? And to try and kind of unpack where the kind of processing lenses are going wrong, because we all have, in a sense, a belief system or a lens through which we interpret everything. It's the kind of the story we tell ourselves. So if you grow up believing that you're not good enough, and therefore I need to always keep trying harder, how I interpret my husband saying he doesn't like my dinner might be one of, well, I'm a failure as a cook, or one of, I better go for cooking lessons, or I'm just not good enough, so I beat myself up. So the lens through which you interpret everything becomes the space that needs to be, in a sense, tackled.
Okay. So you name the issues up front. How do you start to name this is what's driving it space?
So when you're dealing with the issue over here, as a counselor, you're looking, when a person's viewing that issue, you're asking yourself, what belief is this person saying to themselves? what emotion are they feeling? So if they're feeling a high level of anxiety, then there might be a performance-based belief underneath that, or high levels of guilt that I'm failing, also a sense of I need to be achieving. If there's huge anger around something, there could be a frustration around expectations not being met, whether that's of self or other. So you're basically looking for the emotion that it's triggering. How is this resulting in you feeling? And what is the belief behind that? And how is the person behaving when that issue is triggered? Do they go into attack mode? Do they go into withdrawal mode? So it's basically the emotions, the beliefs, and the behaviors that you're trying to ascertain. Not all three are going to be very cognitively present or visually present. Sometimes it'll be high behavior because the person might not be in tune with what they're thinking, or it might be high emotion. So as the person observing, you've got to be kind of looking for one of those three clues, or hopefully all of them, and then start to kind of feed that back. So when this is happening, what's going on here? Why are you feeling this? Why are you behaving like this? And then kind of going, where else in your life did you feel this same kind of feeling? Where else did you think this same kind of thought? Or where else did you find yourself reacting and behaving in this same kind of way? Because it's generally going to be triggered to something in the past. And when a person is emotionally kind of what we call out of balance, the reptile brain is what's kind of engaged. It's the part of the brain that's all about survival and self-protecting, in like a self-protecting mode. There's very little ability to have any rational reasoning in those spaces. So if you're counseling couples and they're kind of talking through all of this, but now suddenly it becomes high emotion, it's pointless trying to deal with anything on a cognitive level because they're not going to hear it. You need to kind of bring them back into balance, and the way to do that is by reflecting or naming the emotion you see in the person. So I'm wondering, can you tell me a little bit about what's going on inside of you feeling-wise? So, and then reflect that back. So you're feeling frustrated, or you're feeling resentful, or you're feeling unappreciated. So you name those emotions, because when a person has felt emotionally understood, it helps bring them back into balance, because to feel understood is to feel loved.
Yeah.
And when they feel back in balance, they're then able to then go, okay, now let's unpack this a little bit. Where else did you think this or feel this? What is this about?
So one of the things that will help us as elders and leaders is, because we're not as skilled as Madz in the counselling space, to actually use a tool like dialogue. So have the person name the problem, the spouse repeat the problem. Generally, you avoid a lot of the messiness, and you can sit there with a pen and piece of paper, and I really suggest you do this, and look for those behaviors and those emotions, and look for the underlying beliefs, because you'll be able to take those notes whilst they are repeating what their spouse has said, you'll be able to see that come out much more clearly. It'll protect you from getting caught in the, okay, why did you do that? Why did you do that? And that stuff makes for really long counselling unless you're really skilled.
Yeah. And I think what's also helpful is to increase your emotional vocab, because emotions are a language that we learn. It's not something we automatically do. So even if you're going to get a spectrum of emotions chart, from whether it's just anger to resentment to bitterness to frustration to irritation, I mean, those are all different emotional words, but they portray varying degrees of anger. Another helpful thing to understand is that anger is a secondary emotion, and generally people react from a place of anger, but it's because another emotion has been triggered. So if I've got a broken leg and you touch it, or you kind of knock it, I'm not going to go, oh, I'm sore. I'm going to react in anger because of the pain. And when you understand the first emotion, so whether it's I felt not good enough, or whether I felt betrayed, or whether I felt unimportant, I felt hurt, when you name the primary emotion, it dissipates the secondary emotion of anger. So trying to also, when you just see two couples kind of really venting a lot of anger, is to kind of ask yourself what is going on behind that emotion, and to help them kind of, in a sense, see it is also quite helpful.
Okay, Madz, once we've diagnosed the issues, how do we actually get people to change?
Okay. So first of all, hopefully there's a desire in both parties to want to change. But often if you've got a wounded person kind of married to a selfish victim type person, there's going to be elements of not wanting to change. And as I said before, the only way a person's going to change is if their behavior is impacting nobody else but themselves. So if that's the kind of case that you're dealing with, it's a matter of time to help the person that in a sense is not the victim to discern what is theirs to own and what is theirs not to own. So it kind of boils down to a boundary thing. So generally, if you've got people in a relationship where there's poor boundaries, that's the one, and then that's the other. It becomes very blurred in the sense of what's mine, what's not mine. So a victim's going to be very manipulative in the sense of kind of putting their stuff into somebody else's life.
So what's in here is behaviors and emotions.
Emotions, whose
needs.
responsibility, this is your problem, you fix it. So if I'm an alcoholic and I'm spending all the money on drink and all of that, and you don't like it, well, that's not my problem, you need to make more money. And so it's very blurry in the sense of whose problem is it. Where there needs to be a more healthy approach to marriage in the sense of going, so I'm going to just put B for boy and G for girl. In the sense, this is your stuff and this is my stuff, and this is kind of where kind of us happen. And so if this is your stuff in the sense of this is your addiction, for example, then you need to feel the pain of that, because I'm not going to step into that space and rescue you. So either I'm going to put down healthy boundaries. It might even mean like a trial separation, or you no longer have control over the finances. So it's kind of putting down those those healthy boundaries.
So putting consequences in place.
100%.
If a person keeps doing this.
100%. Now a person's going to generally kick back. If there's been no boundaries and now you're putting down boundaries for the first time, there's always going to be kickback, because being married to a person that has no boundaries is great, because I never have to take ownership of myself. Now if that person's saying take ownership, the last thing I want to do is take ownership. So I'm going to, in a sense, manipulate and emotionally blackmail the out of you because I don't want to change. So this is where it's really tough for the other person, because they're going to need a good support structure to kind of keep encouraging them to put down those healthy boundaries and to not be manipulated back into that rescue role. They might need a bit of private counseling in the sense of if you have no sense of self-worth, you're going to blur yourself in a kind of codependent relationship. You're going to lose yourself in it, because you need to be needed, you need to rescue, and you will take ownership of the guilt they place on you and go, I'm a bad person, I've failed, I'm not good enough as a spouse. I've seen even couples get to the place where this girl's talking about how her husband so emotionally blackmailed her into doing stuff. And he would even go as far as kind of taking a gun and putting it to his head, going, if you don't do this, I'm going to kill myself. To the point where she snapped one day and said, well, then do it. And he did. Then she carried the huge guilt of, it was my fault because I told him to do it. Yeah. And it was only through months and months of counseling where she suddenly realized that actually this was emotional abuse. This was psychological abuse on an extreme level. So again, when your boundaries are now being installed, you're going to get pushback. If you're not strong enough to resist that pushback, you're going to end up resorting back into kind of codependence. I've lost myself again because I don't like being shouted at or told that I'm not good enough. So it becomes very much a boundary thing. And the more you know your worth and your value as a person, on a psychological and an emotional level, the better you become at your boundaries. So in the same way that a house that's in Umhlanga versus a house that's out in the middle of a rural area, one's going to have very big boundaries in sense of security walls because the content is high value versus another. So when you know your value and your self-worth, you're going to be better at putting down those boundaries. So if you're counseling a couple where there's high victim and kind of low sense of self-worth.
Well, let's take an example. Let's say that he's the spender and she's the saver, and he's blown the budget a whole bunch of times, and now she's feeling the pain of living in debt. So she decides to put down a boundary.
Yeah.
Let's talk that through. What will that end up looking like?
Okay, well then he's obviously going to try through manipulation, try and regain control of that. So he's going to probably undervalue her, going, you don't know what you're doing, and just probably speak a whole lot of kind of verbal abuse potentially.
To wear her down.
To wear her
knocking the boundary
down, going, you know, it's the same as a kid wanting a sweet in a shop. If you say no, what do? They throw an emotional tantrum in order for them to kind of give in and go, okay. And they'll keep pushing at that boundary.
And that's the space where we as elders and community get behind her
And support
go,
and say
now
no.
You have to keep that boundary up. You have to cut up the credit card. You have to, whatever that boundary is.
100%.
That consequence for his mistake.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay.
And so when she feels the support, it might be easier for her. If she chooses to go, you know what, I'll just go back to this. And that often happens because there's an element of,
It's too painful.
it's too painful, and also I don't believe I deserve better.
Yeah.
And so negative abuse is better than nothing. And that's the danger a lot of people who are in abusive relationships find themselves in, is that they'd rather be in an abusive relationship than be in no relationship at all.
And the truth is, we can't really do anything for that person until they get to the end of themselves and go,
100%.
I can't take this anymore.
Yeah. And sadly, a lot of people do that to the points of bitterness and resentment, and then they just get divorced. So long term, they don't realize that making these short-term decisions to keep going back into abuse is going to result in actually being alone anyway, but now it's 10 years down the line and they're kind of wounded really badly through that destructive relationship. So if you can kind of even show them that whole long-term, short-term pain gain kind of perspective, in the sense of, we also use this tool in the sense of, so this is the current behavior. If I stay in it, or if I change current behavior. So staying in the current behavior, what are the pros and cons? Not staying in this current behavior, what are the pros and cons? And then it's also looking at, if I do change the behavior, what are the pros and cons? And if I don't go into that place, what are the pros and cons? And what that starts to pull out are, what are the fears to change? And what are the irrational thinkings to staying in this position? Because you want to get a person to understand, well, why are you choosing to stay in this? How is it serving you? And kind of unpack that. But again, I generally try and just pump into this person a sense of, this is your value. Because the more they know their value, the more they're able to speak with their voice versus the other way.
So why this is such a great tool is because what generally happens is we see the mistake here, she raises it and tries to put the boundary in, and then he gets angry and goes, no, it's because you did this that I'm so angry, and that's why I spent. And we as counselors, we generally get drawn into that and we try and work out what's what. The truth is, it's his responsibility to handle his anger, not hers. Whatever she's done to him, he might have a valid response of anger, but it's still his anger. He needs to work with that. And she needs to work with the rejection she's feeling. That's her problem, not his to fix. When you start to separate these things, you can start going, okay, you have to change that and you have to change that, and we don't get caught in the messiness in the middle, which makes counselling impossible. Yeah.
An easy way to also discern who's got the problem is the person that goes out of balance first. So if she goes, right, we need to cut up credit cards and we need to do this. If he goes off the handle, he's gone out of balance first. So therefore, he's the one with the problem. So it's kind of then be able to reflect, I can see you really angry about this. I can see you're frustrated about this. And just active listen back his emotion he's feeling to hopefully bring him. Now, if he's a wounded person that's wanting help, and you active listen into his unbalanced emotional state, there's a high chance that he'll come back into balance and kind of go, okay, yes, I am angry, yes, I am frustrated, because it's working for me, but I also see that it's not working for you, and so we need to kind of solve. If you go out of balance first, there's a good chance that your stuff of needing to rescue is now being tapped into. And that's ultimately what he wants, because then it's winning for him. So what he does, in a sense, unconsciously, is he pulls your circle over his and pulls you back into that place of going, I don't know whose problems what, but I'll just fix all of the problems because I'm now in that space.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's been able to discern who goes out of balance first is the person that's actually got the problem. And then they need to sit and own it, and you've got to keep them in that place. Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, I used my example when I was preaching of I struggled to engage emotionally when Ames was hurting, and she needed to come the extra mile, but I needed to make an effort. How do you know when a person really is wounded and they're trying to take responsibility for their whole side, but the wound is so strong that their ability to satisfy their partner's need is just not enough? How do you work that out, and what do you do with it?
You know, I think the more a person understands what the root of the wound is. So, you know, if I phone you up and I say, hey, Ross, I need you to come and do something for me, and you say to me, hey, Madz, I've just been in a massive car accident, I'm in ICU, my expectations of you is going to shift. I can't expect you to get out of bed and come and fix my car because you're in ICU.
Yeah, so empathy on the...
So empathy. So understanding brings empathy, and it brings intimacy, and it brings a level of kind of servanthood. So it kind of grows that compassion for the other, and it shifts our expectations of them. So if I know you're wounded, my approach to you is going to be a lot more gentle. My understanding and my grace to you is going to be bigger. It's that love covers a multitude of sin. And sin is in a sense the byproduct of the wound.
Yeah.
So if I'm hurting, and you prod my hurt, and I smack you, the smack is the sin, the cause of it is the pain. And so we're able to look past the behavior, which is the sin, what I do, and look at understanding why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Yeah. And what's so helpful about that is it helps us go back to our theological start, which is you're a new creation. But there's an aspect of your new creation by belief systems and by experience that is wounded, and we need to help you grow into who God's made you in your spirit man. We need your head and your heart and your whatever else to be healed so that you can act out who God's already made you to be.
That's where I find when a person understands what the original starting point is in terms of creation, Genesis 2, how God intended it to be, where it fell to, and the psychology in Genesis 3 in terms of the running, hiding, and covering, which is our self-protective strategies from our shame, from our sin. When we understand the roots of all of that and how it plays out is that I either seek to control my environment by finding solutions in creation versus finding identity in God. And generally how it plays out is that most people turn to creation instead of creator to solve the wounds.
Yeah.
And when they understand that process, they're able to let go of creation and go back to creator. Yeah. You will never let go of creation if it's feeding you, if you don't have something else to hold on to. And that's where I think it's so important to bring psychology and theology together, because then it makes sense on why I need to hold on to my Savior.
So that's the end of part 1, and the next part will be doing the wholeness course, which will help us to get to those beliefs and behaviors and the emotions, and help us to diagnose those. But over the next while, we want to get better and better so that we can sustain a culture of grace, an understanding of grace, and help people connect to it, even though they've got this big space of woundedness or just selfishness that they need to grow through.